metabolic flexibility, and protein-sparing modified fasting. More harm than good? Let's talk about it. Welcome back, my friends. My name is Sarah. I am known as Carnivore Yogi. Thank you so much for being here and clicking on today's episode. Today, I am talking with my friend Robert Sikes, who is also known as the Keto Savage. He has been around in this space and consistently on a ketogenic diet for the last 6 years. I love Robert. He is just a really great source of sage wisdom and has a very level-headed approach to everything. So I really wanted to talk with him about what he is seeing as a coach with people going out and implementing a lot of these strategies like metabolic flexibility, adding in carbs, do we need carbs, and the protein-sparing modified fasting and eating super high protein. It's always interesting that people can talk in theory about things, but what I find of true value is talking with someone who actually works one-on-one with people, who responds and gets lots of messages from people who are trying these things. So I feel like Robert and I had a really fair and balanced conversation about these topics, and I hope you find value and enjoy it. Which, if you do, please do share this video, like this video, leave me a comment down below. It will help get this out to more people. And I want to thank the sponsors of today's episode. The first one is going to be Optimal Carnivore. Now, the grass-fed organ complex is one that I give my daughter every day, and the beef liver supplement is also fantastic. This is one that I give to my mother. Now, my daughter and my mother both absolutely refuse to eat organ meats. It doesn't matter how we cook them up. They are so healthy for you and have so many wonderful health benefits. But I do have people in my life who refuse to eat the organ meat supplements. And I don't love to eat them constantly. So when I'm not eating the organ meat supplements, I also supplement with these from Optimal Carnivore. You can use my code CarnivoreY and save 10% off of any of their supplements. I will leave a link in the information section for you guys. So thank you, Optimal Carnivore, for being a sponsor of the show. I also want to thank Upgraded Formulas, a longtime sponsor and a company that I utilize very regularly. You guys know I love their hair tissue mineral analysis for being able to know what my actual mineral status is. When you get a blood draw and you test your magnesium or your potassium, your sodium, you're only getting a snapshot in time of what is in your bloodstream at that moment. When you do a hair tissue mineral analysis, you can actually see what your body is absorbing and using over the last 60 to 90 days. That is why it is something that I continue to do to check in, make sure that I need to be supplementing or not supplementing. It's just a very, very useful tool. You can use my code YOGI12 to save on anything at the Upgraded Formulas website, including that hair tissue mineral analysis with a consultation. And you guys know how I feel about their magnesium. It is just absolutely the best. I'm always praying when I get my hair tissue mineral analysis back that my magnesium still needs supplementation, just because I absolutely love it that much. So thank you to Upgraded Formulas for sponsoring today's episode. Again, my code there is YOGI12. Don't forget about Optimal Carnivore. Use the code CarnivoreY to save over there. All right, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in to today's episode with the Keto Savage, Robert Sikes. Hope you enjoy it, and I will talk with you soon. All right, guys, thank you so much for coming back and tuning in. I am very excited about my guest today, Robert Sikes. This is his second time chatting with me. The first time was a YouTube only, so I will make sure I link that in the information section for you guys. But I look to Robert in this community as somebody who just really has a damn good head on his shoulders, to be honest with you. So we're going to talk about all kinds of stuff, a lot of the trends happening right now, what he thinks, what he sees with his clients. So thank you, Robert, for being here today.
Hey, thanks for the opportunity. I'm excited to be here and chat with you again.
Yeah. And, I'll link in the information section that video that we did. I guess it's been a little over a year ago, but if you wouldn't mind just kind of briefly introducing yourself, talk about what you do, where you came from, how long you've been around in this space.
Yeah, so I've been ketogenic for 6 or 7 years now. I don't really know what my official start date was. I've been bodybuilding for about twice that time, and I've been bodybuilding as a ketogenic athlete since being keto. I earned my pro card in 2017 following a ketogenic protocol. It's totally transformed my life. My girlfriend at the time, wife now, Crystal, was able to resolve a whole bunch of her GI issues with keto. And we've kind of just joined forces to create this brand and business that's dedicated to making the keto bricks, putting out content for people interested in a ketogenic low carb diet and lifestyle, and just anything and all things fitness and nutrition, following a ketogenic lifestyle, because I'm so passionate about it. It's, like I said, totally transformed my life. And the more I can do to get that wisdom and experience out there to the ears of other people that may be interested, that's what I want to do.
I love it. And you do natural bodybuilding, and I will make sure everyone that is listening can go look at your profile, look at your work, because you've developed quite an amazing physique from being in a ketogenic lifestyle, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I've been bodybuilding since I was a junior in high school. So I built a lot of mass, following a traditional bro diet, carbohydrate based approach. But it just wasn't sustainable for me. I developed a bunch of disordered eating habits. It wasn't healthy long term, and I recognized that. So I went keto as a kind of a way to resolve the disordered eating habits, and I just continued to see progress, and it was more sustainable for me. I felt like it was healthier long term. So I didn't want to deviate from that when I decided to compete again. So I just stuck with it throughout the competition prep and was able to get even better results on stage following a ketogenic approach. So totally doable from a ketogenic standpoint.
Yeah, and your wife, Crystal, you mentioned, she's absolutely gorgeous and has been ketogenic about as long as you have.
Yeah, I think she started about a year after I did. So not quite as long, but yeah, she's totally transformed her health with it as well.
Yeah, she struggled with like Crohn's, colitis, a lot of GI issues, right?
Not Crohn's, but she had a bunch of like slow transit, IBS, all kinds of
Mm.
other issues. She would just get super bloated and wouldn't be able to eat anything for like days on end until she switched over to a ketogenic diet. And that seemed to, it didn't happen overnight, but after, several months of doing that, it was able to resolve the issues.
It's amazing. I love it. And that's, I think, one of the reasons why the both of you guys are so passionate in doing what you do. I mean, you have a whole company, Keto Brick, which, shameless plug, delicious way to hit those keto macros. But you guys have both had such life-changing results from following a ketogenic approach. Is that, what drives your passion, what drives you to keep showing up day after day?
Yeah, totally. I mean, a lot of people got into keto and started creating a coaching platform and a brand and a business once the popularity of keto kind of reached its height. We were doing this before it was ever popular, before it was mainstream, and we were just super passionate about the lifestyle because of how it helped our personal lives. And we'll be here preaching the same message long after the hype dies down and the bubble fades, because I know so many people firsthand, not just us and those close to us, but random people that have reached out over the years who have totally transformed their health with the ketogenic approach. And when you hear enough of that, day after day after day, you don't need any more convincing that there's something to this. And I have no desire to just reach for the next hype that comes along within the nutrition circles. I mean, this is what it is for me, and I'm excited to keep diving deeper into it.
Awesome. Yeah. And anyone who's listening, definitely make sure you're following both Robert and Crystal. I'll put their information below for you, but I just watch you guys day after day showing up, for your business. You've done so much for your business. You do for yourselves, always working out, and just, you guys don't do the cheat meals, the cheat days, those challenges you see a lot of people doing. You guys pretty much stay on the straight and narrow, right?
Yeah. I mean, for us, like for Crystal, she would feel very terrible from a gastric standpoint if she was to deviate and eat a bunch of carbs. So she doesn't do it for that reason alone. For me, I could totally eat carbs. I feel like my relationship with food has resolved itself, and I could consume carbs and it not be an issue for me. I never had any type of gastric issues from it, but I choose not to because I feel so good with it. I don't know why I would want to deviate from what I know is better for me, both acutely in the moment and long term. So for that reason, I don't need any more motivation than that to stay strict. I mean, I've been strict for 6 or 7 years now, and I have not once deviated and had a carb meal. I haven't needed to have a carb meal from a performance standpoint. There's so many people that try to introduce these carbs and assuming that it's going to help from a performance standpoint or just from a psychological standpoint, and oftentimes backfires on them. So I don't need to fix what's not broken, so to speak.
Yeah. And that's, kind of leads me into one of the topics I wanted to talk with you about, which is really hot right now in the space that we're in, is just metabolic flexibility. So many people act as though it's 100% necessary, that you have to be. And I've personally, I'll tell my followers, I've been playing around with it a little bit myself just to see how my body responds, because I'm all about experimenting. I have not been going out and eating donuts and rice and stuff, but just, maybe have a high protein day or have a day with some, healthy carbs, just to see if I can jump back into ketosis the next day. And I always do. I'm always back in right away. But that's me. I want to know your stance on, oh, and I don't think it's necessary for everyone to do, just to throw that out there. It's just something I've personally decided to play with. But I want to know what your thoughts are on the whole metabolic flexibility thing.
Yeah. So, I mean, I have nothing against carbohydrates. I don't demonize carbohydrates. If people have a good relationship with carbohydrates and it doesn't affect them negatively from a physical standpoint or an emotional standpoint, and that's what they want to eat, then by all means, go for it. Like, I'm not going to sit here and tell you can't do that. I'm not going to be a carb police or anything like that. For me, I don't think it's for everybody. I don't think it's necessary from a biological standpoint. Like, there's no hard evidence that suggests from a hormonal standpoint you have to have carbohydrates. I mean, it's just simply not an essential macronutrient. I mean, that's pretty clear. A lot of people have trouble staying strict keto because they have all this relationship tie-in to food, whether it be at family gatherings, holidays, things of that nature. And if you're going to incorporate some of those things, then doing so from a place in which you're already fat adapted and have been following a ketogenic diet for quite some time, so you can switch back and forth in this metabolic flexibility state, so to speak, is 100% the way I would recommend people do it. For me, my goal is to optimize my performance from a ketogenic standpoint. And my take on metabolic flexibility is it's kind of like a jack of all trades, master of none, so to speak. It's not a bad thing if you want to have more variety like that, but it's not going to bode well for becoming the best you can be from a ketogenic standpoint or the best you can be from a carbohydrate dependent standpoint. So I'm an extremist in that I like to optimize for a very given specific task and goal. And I don't feel like metabolic flexibility is the best way to optimize for any one or the other.
Gotcha. So you don't really think that there's, the people out there. I know you talked to Layne Norton recently on your podcast, which was a great episode. I really enjoyed that one. But he's one of the ones, and there's a lot of other people that I feel like they're kind of anti-keto, anti-low carb. Layne's more just anti-BS, honestly, than he is anything. But they say that if you don't have the occasional carbohydrate, then you're going to become insulin resistant the opposite way. Do you think there's any validity to that at all?
No. So there is like, if you are ketogenic and you're strict keto, and then you have a massive bolus of carbohydrates or glucose or something like that, you would fail a glucose tolerance test.
Right.
However, that's a very temporary thing. Like, I watched Layne's video on, becoming insulin resistant if you're long-term keto.
Yeah,
And
I saw
that's
that one.
basically in the context of, if you were to take a glucose tolerance test, you would fail. So like a lot of pregnant women that go and get their glucose tolerance test fail that because it's a 75-gram dose of this glucola that they take. And if they haven't had sugars in, months or years, their body's not going to know how to handle that. However, if someone, your body doesn't forget how to consume and use glucose. It just takes a little bit more time. Just as when you are first becoming keto adapted, it doesn't happen overnight. It takes a few weeks for your body to kind of generate those metabolic pathways and take in that nutrient and know what to do with it. So if I was to go back to eating carbohydrates and titrating those back in, I would become just as, insulin sensitive as I've always been. It's just it takes a little bit of an adaptation phase, both into ketosis and out of ketosis.
Yeah. And I feel like one of the points that you made is just that there are so many people, and this is where I walk the line with clients, is like, if I tell someone, I want you to have carbs every Saturday, then most people aren't going to be able to do that. It's just from a kind of triggering standpoint that a lot of people will have carbs one day and something, kind of sets off in their head and they just want to eat carbs every single day. If someone, I feel like, wants to maybe play with this, they really need to be
extremely stable. Just they would need to be like a Robert Sikes, just like disciplined, stable, steady. It's not something for some people it's going to be like playing with fire. Do you think that's adequate?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I have no way of knowing the exact statistic, but a massive percentage of the people that follow a ketogenic or carnivore diet do so because they simply know that they can't handle carbohydrates reasonably well. From a psychological standpoint, they just start going off the rails and deviating, and it's easy to do. I mean, it is an addictive substance. Just like the more I've dove into the psychology of nutrition, the more similarities I see between hyperpalatable, highly processed sugary foods and alcohol, drugs, things of that nature. Like people that consume carbs in excess, especially those types of carbohydrates, they have a very hard time reeling that back in and having a healthy relationship with those carbohydrates. That's not going to be so much so the case for sweet potatoes and brown rice, but
Right.
it's kind of like what is your own stepping stone? What's your gateway to having more foods? Like if I play the elimination as opposed to moderation game and I just swear it all off altogether and I don't feel like I'm sacrificing anything, I'm much less likely to totally go off the rails on a carb bender because it's never really an option in my mind anyways.
Yeah, I agree. And, coming from a background myself, I'll be 5 years sober from alcohol next month. Um, I can't go out and have a glass of wine one
Mm-hmm.
night. As soon as I put that back on the table, it's something I want to do constantly. And so me playing around with trying to carb cycle a little bit and just see how my body responds, I know it's like I have to be in a very mentally stable place because it is kind of like playing with fire just a little bit. So that's why I don't make videos about it. That's why I don't necessarily have clients doing it, just because I do think it's kind of like tempting the bear.
Yeah, and that's my frustration for influencers and people in the space right now that are suggesting that in order to be optimal or in order to excel in life, you have to have these carbohydrates. Because if someone doesn't have a good relationship with carbs, yet they want to be and perform the best they possibly can, if they're constantly inundated with this information that you have to have carbs to excel, they're going to be more tempted to play with that fire, and that's more likely going to backfire on them. So I don't like seeing all the information suggesting that you have to have this in order to be the best version of yourself that you can be. If you choose to go that route and it doesn't have any negative impacts on you, then by all means go for it. But to suggest that you have to go that route is just not the case.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that. I'm gonna have to like do a little soundbite of that to just put out there because yeah, I feel like it's very popular right now, the whole, and we'll talk about some more of the kind of popular trends, but this is one that could be dangerous for people that are really struggling with food addiction and that are really struggling. And then they hear like, well, for me to be healthy, then I have to be metabolically flexible, and staying keto and not, going off keto is unhealthy now.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't want anyone to think that is really the absolute bottom line truth. That's another reason I wanted to bring you on, because you don't do that. And you look pretty damn healthy to me.
Yeah, I feel pretty healthy. I'm excited to keep doing this and doing it for the next, 50, 60, 70 years and seeing what the outcome is after that length of time. You see a lot of people talk about it from a hormonal standpoint in females that you have to have carbs to have a
Yes.
regular cycle. And so much of that links back to just simply women chronically under eating in the first place.
Mhm.
And people, if they're told that they have to have carbs to have a regular cycle, and then they're chronically under eating, they have a bolus of carbs, that might expedite that cycle returning to normal, but it's not the carbs that necessarily was the fix. That's just simply a band-aid over the main underlying issue, which is that they're not eating enough nutrition to begin with. So there's a lot of things that kind of paint not having carbs in a negative light, but it's not necessarily that you're not having carbs, it's that you're missing some other issues that are of paramount importance, eating enough food being one.
Agree, 100% agree. And I feel like there's so many people that just kind of point to keto carnivore and say, well, you're going to wreck your thyroid, you're going to screw up your hormones. And I'm like, actually, at 42, my hormones are better than they were when I was in my mid 30s.
Mm-hmm.
I just had a panel run, and my doctor was like, what have you been doing? Because your hormone panel is literally like somebody in their mid 30s, like someone 7 or 8 years younger than you. And I
Mm-hmm.
was like, and she's vegan. So
Yeah.
I was
Yeah.
like, do you really want to know? Yeah. She told me on a consultation back in June that I needed to stop taking organ meat supplements. She's like, oh, don't take those. Those are dirty. They're filled with metals and things. And I was like, okay, maybe we should just stick to stick to the blood work and not jump into the nutrition piece.
Yeah,
But
there's so much. I don't know. Like I don't know if it's dogma that people from other groups are bringing to the table, or if it's just I don't want nutrition to become a religion, so to speak.
right.
But at the same time, it's like I am very passionate about this lifestyle because it has totally given me my life back.
Yeah.
So it's hard not to bring your underlying thoughts and passions to the table. But I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing if you're not doing it at the expense of the data and what you're actually experiencing.
Yeah, I agree. And that's where, I mean, that's why I'm sitting here right now talking with you, is that changing the way that I eat and my lifestyle has been the biggest thing I've done. I've been off of all medications for years now. No sleeping medications, no SSRIs, no benzodiazepines, no alcohol, no nothing. And
Mhm.
I attribute that to nutrition. That's why I'm so passionate about sharing it with people, because yeah, if people could just change these things, I feel like it would move the needle so much for them that the quality of life they have could be amazing,
100%.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah. And I guess kind of speaking on that same token of not enough nutrition, not enough energy, right? I really want to talk about protein sparing modified fasting, because and just the high
The bear on this one.
I know. And this trend of like really high protein and low fat going on, because it's really popular right now. And I've tried it myself long ago and it was not a good thing for me, but I want to hear what your thoughts are and kind of what you've seen with people.
Yeah. So quick little disclaimer here. I am not the high fat guy. Like a lot of people just assume that I am anti-protein because I'm so high fat. And that's not the case. Like I've got some clients that are consuming 100 grams more protein than they are dietary fat. However, they're still consuming ample calories so that they're taking in more than enough fat to be at a healthy hormonal baseline. My issue with the protein sparing modified fast, and I did a really good podcast with Rachel Gregory, who's talked about this quite a bit. And her way of going about it makes sense, because the main issue with the protein sparing modified fast trend that's gained a ton of momentum as of late is that oftentimes the recommendations for the protein sparing modified fast days is, 600 or 700 calories, and that the normal baseline intake should be around 1,200 calories, which is just adequately non-existent. I mean, you're not consuming enough food to function. I mean, I made a post the other day about the concentration camps in Nazi Germany, and people were rationed 1,200 or 1,300 calories then, and then when the war got really bad, it was 600 or 700 calories. So these protein sparing modified fast recommendations are literally the same or more or less calories than what these poor souls were consuming in Nazi Germany concentration camps, which is just crazy. I mean, a 6-month-old infant should be consuming more than 600 calories. So having a grown adult that's active, training, has a whole bunch of neat activity, is functioning throughout the day, for them to be at 600 calories multiple days a week and then return to what they say is a healthy baseline at 1,200, 1,300 calories is just not sufficient, not optimal from a long shot. So that's my big concern there. And then a lot of times that comes at the expense of, like you were saying, enough dietary fat, which is going to have a pretty profound negative impact on the hormonal levels. There's satiety signals, which could then backfire and have all kinds of issues from a food relationship standpoint. Like if you don't feel hungry and you're trying to reach a goal compositionally speaking, and you're not able to get there and you're miserable throughout the entire process, then that's going to create a very negative relationship with you and the food you consume. Calories and food is just fuel. You need to fuel your body properly. And if you're scared to fuel yourself properly because you're being told that you can only consume 600 calories, that's not going to bode well for having a healthy relationship with food that you consume. So yeah, I could talk all day long about protein sparing modified fast and them not being optimal. But if you were to do a protein sparing modified fast and then return so that your baseline days are significantly higher in calories. So your average caloric consumption throughout the course of a week is still in a healthy, sustainable level. I would have much less of an issue with that, but that's not really what's being preached out there right now.
Yeah, I feel like it's kind of like fasting in general. It's like a hammer people use, and then they just use it constantly. And it's the what I'm seeing that is scary with the protein sparing modified fast is what you mentioned, is just possibly doing it like you talked about with Rachel Gregory, a couple days a week, right? So she's eating like pretty much maintenance or maybe a tiny little deficit 5 days a week, and then doing protein sparing modified fast 2 days a week, right? Is that kind of
Yeah.
what you're referring to, that
Yeah.
might
She was,
possibly be okay?
I think we did the math on that podcast with her. And when we factored in her PSMF days and her, normal intake throughout a normal day, it was still within a totally healthy, reasonable intake. I mean, it was like north of 1,600 calories, with the goal being to lose body fat and having been in a deficit for a while. So that's realistic. That's reasonable, depending on the individual and how long they've been cutting. But if you start doing multiple days a week at 600 calories, and then you return up to only 1,200 calories, like, just to give some context here, I never take my competition prep clients below 1,200 calories during the last week of a competition prep, when they're super lean and very light and in an extreme deficit. So for people to be having a baseline of 1,200 calories and then several days sub 1,000 calories, like, that's just not optimal from any angle you attack. It's just not going to be the best.
Yeah, I agree. And, just to talk a little bit about metabolism, what someone might see with that, they're definitely going to see their non-exercise activity thermogenesis go down. And that's going to affect, just how much their body's going to be able to burn. So at the end of that, what kind of consequences do people see if they like kind of chronically do that over a long period of time?
Mm-hmm. And you do that for so long, and like you said, your metabolism downregulates, your hormones downregulate, and then you bottom out, like your body just plateaus. And then when you start increasing calories, you're going to have a pretty negative repercussion there, because your body's been so depleted for so long that it's just ready to store, as a survival mechanism, basically anything that you give it. So you can't sustain that intake, and you finally wisen up to that fact. You start eating more, and then it has this negative repercussion because it's been deprived for so long that it automatically starts storing the food that you are eating as fat. And that scares people into going into an even deeper deficit, and just becomes this massive negative feedback loop that leaves people less healthy than they were when they started, and oftentimes in a worse composition. So it's not what I would ever recommend people do.
Yeah, I agree. And you work with people that have done that, right? That have not necessarily protein sparing. I'm sure they've done all kinds of other things, but how would you help somebody who's done that? Kind of what's the time period that would take for them to kind of reverse out of that damage? And what would your steps be to help that person?
Yeah. So reverse dieting is super important when you're coming from a very low intake to begin with. A good rule of thumb is to be at a maintenance or surplus for like 3 times the amount of time that you've been in a deficit. So when I'm doing a competition prep, for instance, I'll diet down for 6 months. I'll take 3 months to reverse back up to a healthy maintenance. And then I'll be at a healthy maintenance or surplus for 2 or 3 years before I dive back into another cut, because it takes time to let things stabilize, especially if you're a natural competitor or just a natural human. You don't even have to be stepping on stage. So yeah, just simply talking with people about the importance of slowly bringing that protein and fat back up, so their body. So basically we minimize the adverse response as much as possible. And if we're also increasing your training activity during that time, so that your body has a use for those calories that you're consuming, and hopefully partitioning it towards more lean muscle mass growth instead of more body fat tissue. That's usually a pretty good way to go about it, to hedge the bets and put the chips in your favor, so to speak. But it's a hard conversation to have, because people, the hardest sell as a coach and a client is when someone comes to me and they want to lose weight, they've been chronically undereating, they're sub 1,000 calories, they have a lot of weight left to lose. And I've got to say, hey, look, we got to increase your calories. You're probably going to put on some body fat. It's just what you have to do in order to kind of reestablish a healthy baseline to begin with. That's a hard sell to try and tell somebody, but it's what needs to happen.
Yeah, I feel like that's a lot of people that I've tried to work with before, and a lot of people aren't going to have the patience to do that. They're going to unfortunately jump to the guru that tells them the reason why they're not losing weight is because oh, you're not metabolically flexible.
Mm-hmm.
I've had a lot of people jump to that. They're like, well, I got to do the metabolic flexibility thing. That's why I'm stuck. Or you got to just do a lot more fasting, And so what that's going to end up doing is making the situation worse.
Yeah, totally. Or, I mean, even worse, they go to some like pill or potion to try and fix things. And then it's just not good. Like anything that sounds too good to be true when it comes to body recomposition is too good to be true. So, and that goes for keto. A lot of people have this disillusional view towards keto being like the magic diet that makes the fat melt away. And that's not the case either. I mean, there is no quick fix shortcut to changing your body composition.
Yeah, that's a tough one. And, I think a lot of people jump in and say just because they're doing keto or they're doing carnivore, that they don't necessarily need to do any tracking, weighing, and measuring. And that does work for a good amount of people. But then I get the tough ones, where they're like, well, I've been keto for 6 months or a year and I've gained 20 pounds. And I'm like, well, have you ever tracked how much you're eating? And they're like, well, this person and this person says not to track. So no, I haven't. And I'm like, well, you might want to do that.
Yeah. I mean, you got to track, like if you're seeing success and you're seeing progress and you're not plateauing and you're not tracking, then keep doing what you're doing because it's obviously working for you. But a lot of people will kind of transition into a deficit just because they're not consuming nearly as many hyperpalatable foods. When they do a ketogenic or carnivore approach, the fat is more satiating. So they may oftentimes dip into a caloric deficit just by default without having to track those macros. But if they start plateauing, it's always good to kind of get a good baseline established to figure out what your actual consumption is and then adjust accordingly.
Yeah, it's almost a bad word to say calories, in the keto space and the carnivore space. But, for me, I've lost a lot of weight this year, but I have had to kind of look at what I'm eating, and it hasn't been horribly hard because I've done a lot of other things to improve my mitochondrial health. And so it hasn't been this huge uphill battle. So I've worked on mitochondrial health and gut health. And so losing weight, I haven't had to sit there and calculate every single thing, but I did have to have a come to Jesus moment with the calories that I was consuming. And that's, if I talk about that, anytime I talk about that, I just get kind of blasted with people. This person says, don't track and you shouldn't count calories. And what is your take on like the whole calories thing? I feel like dirty just even saying it. I feel like I'm cursing or something.
Yeah, no, I mean, calories obviously count. I mean, like there's no way to deny that macros count.
I've heard you say so many times.
When I'm going into a competition prep,
state,
like right now, I'm not tracking my macros. I'm able to maintain my 12% body fat, which is about what I'm currently at, pretty effortlessly with a high enough caloric intake. My training's good. This is a really easy, sustainable maintenance for me. However,
what I'm seeing is
when I go into a competition prep and I'm trying to get down to sub 3% body fat, I'm tracking every single thing in sight, like everything to the gram, because getting that lean is not a natural phenomenon. Like that doesn't happen in nature.
They're really, really limited.
And as such, you can't really lean on your intuitive consumption to get to that point.
And I just felt
people that
really terrible.
aren't at a healthy baseline to begin with, maybe their hormones are all out of whack, maybe their relationship with food is all out of whack. They can't really lean on their intuition either because the psychological aspect of consumption is such that if you constantly fixate on food, you're gonna your ability to say, okay, hey, look, I'm full and I've had enough is all out of whack as well. So you can't really lean on that. This is a really weird one because to find a healthy maintenance, it's very weird because not too long ago, like probably 2 years ago, consumption is the whole talk of the town was how bad protein was, gluconeogenesis. You got to have super high fat and very little protein. And that whole time I was like, no, this is stupid. You need to have enough protein to have more protein. Like I was fighting for protein, and then now the tables have shifted. The pendulum has swung so far the opposite direction that people are demonizing fat. It's kind of like the scale, like giving protein a negative relationship with the scale. Like, protein's great and for sure, but it won't step on the scale. The adequate dietary window hit with a sledgehammer. So I'm constantly trying to a scale is an inanimate object. Like it's not a good or bad thing to number from the beginning because protein is amazing. Simply have to have. So take that data. I would never advocate and chronically the desired goal consuming protein. It's not if you don't, to be honest with yourself. There's times where I'll have self-awareness necessary, very specific. If you're just in denial and in a competition prep scenario for reaching the goal, but I would never recommend
I
people
agree.
maintain a very low
Totally.
protein
And,
intake.
I guess
The
the
same is true
next
with in
question I
reverse
would
though,
have
especially if
is
you're trying to
not as
optimize from a
related to the weight
ketogenic
thing,
fat
but
adaptation
just this
standpoint.
whole high
If you are
protein
trying to be
thing
the
that's going
best you
on.
can be with a ketogenic diet, it's not going to bode well for you if you're consuming, 20% of your calories from dietary fat and the rest from protein. That's just not going to be the best and most optimal ketotic levels. And I mean, hopefully anybody that knows scientific research and how beta hydroxybutyrate is taken up into the cells would agree with that. Yes, being in ketosis is a metabolic state, but being in ketosis is not the same thing as being truly keto adapted. And this is why you see like a lot of people when they first do the ketogenic diet, they'll be registering blood ketones of 0.5 or greater. And yes, they're technically in ketosis, but I would argue that their metabolic state of true keto adaptation is not near to the point where it could be yet. And the same is true for people that have, been following this diet for a long time now, and they're deciding to, consume massive amounts of protein at the expense of very little dietary fat. That's certainly not going to be optimal from a ketogenic standpoint either. Before I was ever keto, I was eating a bro diet approach towards bodybuilding, which was times in which carbs were very low, protein was very high, and fat was very low. And, what I was doing then is by what a lot of people's standards of a ketogenic diet are now, but that is not the same thing as what I'm truly doing now. That was not what I would call ketogenic, certainly not from an optimal ketogenic standpoint. And I just don't like seeing people bastardize keto because they're chasing the super high protein relative to dietary fat approach.
Yeah. And I feel like I've talked with some people kind of offline that have been doing this. And one of my friends has been doing really high protein for a while and cutting the fat down. And one of the things that she's noticed is a lot of her kind of chronic aches and pains have come back.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, well, how are your ketones looking? She's like, well, they're not even really registering. I'll get like a 0.2. I'm like, okay. And how's your blood glucose? And she's like, yeah, it's 90 is 100 typically. And I'm like, well, I would be curious to see if you took that protein down just a little bit. And I'm not telling you to eat 30 grams of protein a day. I'm telling you maybe to just tighter it down a little bit, up your fat, try to actually get back into ketosis to see if some of those chronic aches and pains don't go away like the way they were before when you were eating a good amount of fat and a decent amount of protein,
Yeah, I think there's the protein sparing modified fast and the super high protein are kind of correlated in the sense that, the big advocates for this are suggesting that protein is very important. You need to be consuming adequate protein, which I couldn't agree with more. However, if that individual is coming at it from the context of not consuming adequate calories to begin with, then in order for them to be consuming enough protein at their caloric intake, then fat would have to be reduced significantly, which is not good. So I feel like a lot of this could be resolved if people are simply eating enough to begin with. Because if you're eating enough calories to begin with and you're hitting your protein target, then you can just make up the rest of those calories with fat and it'd be totally within a healthy range. And you wouldn't have to have all the hormonal issues that come with the low dietary fat. The problem is, people are trying to consume enough protein at the expense of enough calories, and then fat's what suffers.
Exactly. Yeah. And I feel like that's the problem, because our bodies, what I have to explain to a lot of people is that our bodies only are going to run off of carbohydrates or glucose or ketones. We can be in gluconeogenesis. Like that's a metabolic process. It's going to happen, but we don't want to live there because that's where I start to see people having really big issues. Is just they're constantly, like a friend of mine her blood sugar is getting up in that pre-diabetic range. She's not really registering ketones. Yeah, she might be losing some weight, but what's the cost of that? Like long-term, if you continue to do that, what does that look like on your body?
Yeah, I mean, gluconeogenesis is not a bad thing, but
Right.
it is certainly not an optimal thing from an energy production standpoint. Like carbohydrates are a substrate for energy. Fat and ketones are a substrate for energy. Protein is not a substrate for energy.
Right.
And a lot of people are trying to use it for their energy demands, and that's just not an efficient process. Like gluconeogenesis is not an efficient process for creating energy to move the body, especially if you're active, which everybody hopefully is. So yeah, if you're going to go the carbohydrate route, then optimize for that. If you're going to go the ketogenic route, then optimize for that. But recognize that optimizing for a low carb ketogenic route does not involve minimal dietary fat and massive boluses of protein.
Right. And one other, one thing that I noticed just in my own history before I even did carnivore, keto, or anything, I was really into weightlifting, and I would eat tons of protein. I mean, I would eat 150 grams of protein, that's a lot for me, 160 grams of protein a day. But I was also eating carbohydrates, I
Mhm.
would have sweet potatoes, blueberries, I would have rice. So I would think I was giving myself adequate um, carbohydrates to be able to eat that much protein and my body could break it down. But now I find if I try to eat that much protein and, no carbohydrates, I start running into issues like my EGFR, my kidney numbers, they start plummeting. I start having high uric acid in my blood. My blood work gets really, really wonky. And that wasn't the case when I was eating the carbohydrates. And I know this is maybe like, I don't know if it's something that you ever see with your clients, but I don't know. For some reason, I feel like a lot of people talking about PE diet and Naiman's approach are probably doing more of what I was doing, the low fat, but still eating carbohydrates, eating lots of protein. And for whatever reason, my body did really well with that until I started developing a lot of autoimmune issues. And then I had to just go ketogenic. Um, but then I see people like me trying to do that high protein with no carbohydrates and, just a little bit of fat, having all those issues with blood work and energy and things like that. Do you see any kind of correlation like that or anything with your clients?
Yeah, and blood work is interesting because it's totally volatile depending on if you're in a surplus or a deficit. For instance,
Mm,
if you're in a deficit, your hormone markers are oftentimes going to tank, but your
yep.
lipid panel is going to look much better. Whereas if you're in a surplus, your hormone markers are probably going to look pretty good, and your lipid panels are going to look terrible. So the context of whether you're in a surplus or deficit from a net standpoint is going to have a pretty profound impact on your blood work. But yeah, it's been. I don't know that the protein demands would decrease if you're not consuming the carbohydrates. I've honestly not really changed my protein intake that much between when I was carbohydrate dependent versus keto dependent at maintenance. I'll go pretty low protein, like I said, for very specific periods in a cut for a competition. But honestly, like I've had Ted Naiman on the show a few times, and
Mm-hmm.
his maintenance intake is pretty close to a 1-to-1 ratio, which is pretty much my maintenance intake recommendation,
Mm-hmm.
pretty close to a 1-to-1 ratio. So if you're trying to maintain a healthy intake, getting about 1 gram of protein per pound of lean mass or per pound of total mass, if you're not, incredibly overweight, is a pretty good rule of thumb. Taking in a gram of protein per gram of dietary fat is a pretty good starting point for maintenance intake as well.
Gotcha. So somebody that came to you and said, I'm eating 60 grams of protein per day and I'm a 150-pound female, and I'm trying to be ketogenic. I want to be in ketosis. So I'm just going that low. And then the rest of my calories is fat. You think that's probably too low for most people, right?
Yeah, I mean, it depends what the goal is. Like if she's trying to build muscle, I'll typically start clients out at a pretty high fat ratio just to simply remove any inflammation, flush out any, extra fluid that they're holding, and then ensure that they are kind of leading the way to getting more deeply fat adapted. But then I'll start increasing the protein while simultaneously decreasing the fat to figure out what their own unique individual protein threshold is. And I feel like that's something that a lot of people don't take the time to do because they just simply look online. They use a generic macro calculator. They get a number spit out to them and they just like take that as, the word of God. They don't ever deviate from it. Like I change macros for my clients every single week because they're coming to me with a specific goal in mind and we're chipping away very small incremental changes, but changes nonetheless to apply pressure and elicit a response from the body. But yeah, if she's 150 pounds and a good portion of that weight is lean mass, then she's probably going to need more than 60 grams of protein, certainly at a maintenance.
Yeah. And, that's what I found for myself. Just the longer that I've been doing ketosis, being in a ketogenic state, I can eat a little bit more protein. Like I can bump it up, but I've had to go slowly. So
Mhm.
this is where I feel like we might be doing a little bit of disservice to people who are new, who want to get into ketosis and maybe want to get fat adapted, is telling them they have to eat, X amount of, that's a common question I get a lot now is like, how much protein do I need to eat? This is my height, weight, da, 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 da. And I'm like, well, I don't really know. You need to sit down when you do like a full consultation and really talk about it. But I find for me, I had to start off a little bit lower But now that I've been doing it a while, I can get away with eating quite a bit more protein and still stay in ketosis, you know?
Yeah, totally agree. I mean, if someone's just now starting a ketogenic diet and they're coming from eating a whole bunch of carbohydrates, they would much more benefit from starting with a very high fat ratio for a variety of reasons. It's going to have much more of a, satiating effect. If they remove all the carbohydrates, all that food volume, all that bulk, and they don't replace it with something very satiating, that's going to help with their hormones and still give them energy, then they're not likely to sustain the diet, and they're going to start going back to eating the carbohydrates again. Like we said earlier, protein is not a good substrate for energy. So if they're coming from a carb dependent background and they remove their main source of energy, they need to replace that with the fat, or else their ability to sustain long enough to get deeply fat adapted and keto adapted to begin with and start, benefiting from an increase in protein, is they're never going to make it that far.
Yeah, I agree. So that's one thing, when I do get new people, it's like, yeah, you're going to eventually be able to eat a little bit more protein. I think you got to start off low, and then you can add more, not low as in like 30 grams a day or anything like that, but at a place where your body can actually get into ketosis. And like you said, they're going to be able to run off fat a lot more efficiently than they would trying to use protein as an energy source.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. Gosh, I had another question and it just left my brain. Kind of talking about this same topic.
Yeah. So you're getting a lot of clients that are coming in asking about, protein requirements specifically. Are they coming from traditional carbohydrate backgrounds, or are they coming from like the keto carnivore space?
Both. That's a great question. I mean, I get both. I get people like that were like me. I started carnivore and it helped so many things for me. It was amazing for me, but I was never in ketosis because I was just eating most of my calories from protein, and I was still very fat phobic. I was very scared of fat still. And so I would stick to like the filet mignon and, I'd eat the ribeye, but then I would kind of pick the fat and throw it away. So when I was doing carnivore, I really wasn't in a state of ketosis, and it wasn't a problem for me until it started becoming a problem. Like I said, poor energy, poor sleep, pre-diabetic blood sugar numbers, no ketones. And it even led to some gut issues as well. And so I get a lot of people that have kind of come from carnivore. They kind of came in the back door the way I did, that are like, what's going on? Why am I having these issues? Why am I not in ketosis? And then I'll also get people who are coming from a background of eating carbohydrates. I would say I probably get more people from carnivore than I do from standard American diet. So I'm kind of, it's this weird little niche that I'm in for sure.
Well, you got your work cut out for you. I mean, anybody that's been in the space for any length of time, it's so confusing right now because all these influencers, all these coaches, all these gurus are putting out these soundbite pieces of information with cool little cute graphics. They're putting them on their Instagram, and it's like causing all this uproar, and people are coming in without really having much perspective, and they're just confused as hell, and they don't really know which way to turn, because context is so important, and history is so important. So if someone's never been ketogenic before, I'm going to have a very different approach towards them than someone's been doing the diet for years. It's like context is key. And nobody wants to take the time to break that down towards these individuals and illustrate that. And it's just leading to this mass confusion, which is just it's hard to really put your finger on and have a good solid pulse on. But I don't know. I've been living this lifestyle for a long time. And like I said in the beginning, I'm going to keep living it, long after the hype dies down. I just wish there would be less convolution around dieting protocols. I mean, I hate to see the term keto and ketogenic become so convoluted that nobody even knows what it is anymore. Like if you look up the ketogenic diet in Webster Dictionary right now, it's going to say high fat, moderate protein, low to no carbohydrate. That's what it's been from the beginning. That's what it was in the 1920s. And they were using this for epileptic children. But on social media, like there's high protein, there's low protein keto, there's high carb keto. I mean, what the hell is high carb keto?
I don't know.
But yeah, it's just confusing.
Yeah, there's a new doctor I've been working with since May, and she's all about ketosis and sunshine. And she's she's just very like matter of fact. And she says that ketosis is like pregnancy. Either you're pregnant or you're not. Either you're in ketosis or you're not. She's like, you got to test yourself. Like you have to know if you're in ketosis or not. Like, just like you can't go take a pregnancy test and either be kind of pregnant or maybe pregnant. She's like, it is or it isn't. And that's where I feel like people are really getting confused of like, what is ketosis? I'm like, how do I do this? And there's so much information and there's so many influencers that just have all these different ideas. And like, if you don't do this, then you're doing it wrong. That I think people are just kind of getting bewildered at this point.
Yeah. And I totally resonate with the black and whites. Look, you're either registering ketones or you're not, as kind of like the make or break factor. The problem is that so many people take that and run with it to the nth degree.
Yeah,
And
that's
they'll
true
be
too.
like, I'm so active, I can eat a whole banana and still be registering 0.5. So technically this banana is keto food, right? And like that brings with it its own host of, just misinformation and confusion that people don't need. They don't need, like if someone's trying to optimize from a ketogenic diet, you don't need to be eating bananas.
Right. Exactly. That goes back to the whole, like, what is keto? What is ketogenic? Like, and bananas and fruit are not necessarily like a ketogenic food. It's most people are going to need to stay 20 carbs and under, 20 total carbs and under. Some people may be able, like you said, be a little more active, maybe get away with a little bit more, but true keto, true being in ketosis is high fat, moderate protein, low to no carbs,
Amen. That's your soundbite right there.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. Well, this has been really, really awesome. Would you tell us, I guess, some cool stuff that you're up to right now and what the future is looking like?
Yeah, so there's so many things that we're up to right now. We just moved to our new facility, the Compound 2.0. So we're getting that all situated. I'm gonna start bringing in a lot of my podcast guests to do in-person video recording. So I'm super excited about that. I have to get you on the list there.
Yeah.
And then I'm in the middle of writing a book. So actually, the book's pretty well written. I just got to get it sent off to the publishing company and the editor and get all that finalized. There's going to be a companion online course that accompanies that book. It's all about ketogenic bodybuilding. And then there's just a lot of stuff in the works right now. We got some exciting new flavors coming out with the keto bricks. We're starting to do all of our apparel production in-house. So we're about to buy a screen printing press and do all of our own shirt printing. There's a lot of things that are in the pipeline, but don't want to unveil too much before it's time.
Wow, that's so exciting. And I'll make sure I link everything below. It's just, like I said, whenever I'm like watching some of this stuff happen, some of the madness happening, just kind of sitting back, I'm like, I wonder what Robert thinks about this. So like I said, it's been like a year since we've really talked. So it's really cool to kind of hear your viewpoints on all this stuff.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, like there's so much noise out there right now. If you allow yourself to just like become immersed in it, you don't get anything done. Crystal and I were talking the other day and we're like, wow, we got so much done this year. And that shift happened when we pretty much just put our blinders on and said, I don't really care what everybody else is talking about. I'm just going to do what I know to be true and in line with my beliefs and let that dictate my action. I mean, I feel like so many people become paralyzed in their action because they're so worried about what everybody else is doing. And I've fought that tooth and nail. I mean, it's easy to do. And there's times I'm human as well. I get sucked into the Instagram feed and what everybody's talking about, but I really try to act against that whenever possible.
Yeah. And thank you, so much for just being this voice of reason over this last kind of really, the whole world is crazy right now. And I always feel like if I need some calm, centered voice of reason, I can look to your page, your podcast, just watch what you and Crystal are doing. And it just always kind of helps put me back into common sense mode.
Well, I appreciate that for sure. I mean, we have a lot of people that in our lives that kind of keep us centered as well. And I feel like the more, I mean, you and I were talking about Judy the other day. I had a conversation with Judy and she's a rock star. Like she's another one that I can kind of look to and be like, okay, wow, the voice of reason amidst the chaos. So having people like that in your corner is just super important.
I agree 100%. Yeah. Judy's wonderful. And she's somebody that I go to offline when I need advice of like, oh my gosh, what the heck am I going to do about this? Like she can always give me sound advice that's not based on hysteria or panic or any of that. It's just like, no, this is just a reasonable point of view that you can take and do with it what you want. But that's just having those types of people is just invaluable.
100% agree.
Cool. Well, I'll put all of your links below, but just for anybody listening, what's the best way to find you, follow you, and stay in touch with what you guys are doing?
Yeah. So anything Keto Savage, if you type that in, you'll find me. Keto Brick, ketobrick.com is the business with the meal replacement bar. But yeah, Keto Savage, if you type that on Google or social, you'll find me for sure.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Robert, for coming on and chatting today. It's been super awesome. And I know a lot of people are going to find value in the conversation.
Yeah. Yeah. Always a pleasure, Sarah. So keep doing what you're doing and keep fighting the good fight.
Thank you.